Jae Sung sat in his small office at the Gwacheon Science Center, staring intently at the data streaming across his computer screen. As a young astrophysicist, he had always dreamed of making a groundbreaking discovery. Little did he know that this particular evening would change the course of human history forever. The radio telescope array he was monitoring had picked up an unusual signal from a distant star system. At first, Jae Sung thought it might be a glitch or some kind of interference, but as he analyzed the data more closely, his heart began to race. The signal was too structured, too precise to be anything other than artificial. With trembling hands, Jae Sung ran the signal through a series of decoding algorithms. As the message began to take shape, his excitement turned to horror. It was a declaration of war, a chilling ultimatum from a hostile alien race calling themselves the Zorian Empire. People of Earth, the message began, your primitive species has been deemed unworthy of existence. Your planet and its resources are now the property of the Zorian Empire. Surrender unconditionally or face annihilation. Jae Sung felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This couldn't be happening. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe, but they never imagined their first contact would be so terrifying. He quickly contacted his superiors, who in turn relayed the information to the South Korean government. Within hours, the news had spread to every corner of the globe. World leaders held emergency meetings, scrambling to make sense of the situation and formulate a response. As panic began to grip the population, UN Secretary General Park Eun-ji called for calm and unity. In a historic address to the General Assembly, she declared that humanity would not surrender to the Zorian threat. We may be facing our greatest challenge as a species, Eun-ji said, her voice ringing with determination. But we will not cower in fear. We will stand together as one people and defend our home with every ounce of strength and ingenuity we possess. Her words struck a chord with people around the world. In the face of an existential crisis, old rivalries and conflicts seemed to melt away. Nations pledged their support and resources to a global effort to prepare for the impending invasion. Scientists like Jae Sung worked around the clock, studying the alien message for any clues about the Zorians' capabilities and weaknesses. Military leaders began drafting battle plans and mobilizing their forces. In universities and laboratories across the planet, brilliant minds raced to develop new technologies that could give humanity a fighting chance. As the days turned into weeks, a sense of grim determination settled over the world. The human race had been given an ultimatum, but they refused to go quietly into the night. They would meet the Zorian challenge head-on and fight for their right to exist. No one knew what the future held, but one thing was certain. Humanity would not face this threat alone. They would stand together, united in their resolve to protect their home and their way of life. The Zorians had wanted war, but Earth would give them hell. In the wake of the Zorian ultimatum, UN Secretary General Park Eun-ji knew that humanity's only hope was to stand together. She called for an emergency session of the General Assembly, urging all nations to put aside their differences and unite against the alien threat. We face a challenge unlike any in our history, Eun-ji said, her voice filled with conviction. But I believe that in this moment of crisis, we have an opportunity to show the true strength of the human spirit. We must set aside our petty squabbles and work as one, for the sake of our species and our planet. Her words struck a chord with leaders around the world. One by one, they rose to pledge their support and resources to the global effort. Old rivalries and conflicts were forgotten as humanity faced its greatest test. In the days and weeks that followed, an unprecedented wave of cooperation swept across the planet. Scientists and engineers from every nation shared their knowledge and expertise, working tirelessly to develop new technologies that could give Earth a fighting chance against the Zorians. In the United States, NASA and private space companies joined forces to begin construction on a fleet of advanced spacecraft and orbital defense platforms. In Europe, the ESA focused on developing sophisticated sensor arrays and early warning systems to detect incoming Zorian ships. Meanwhile, in China and India, Factories worked around the clock to produce the weapons and supplies that would be needed for the coming war. And in Japan, cutting-edge robotics and AI research was put to work creating autonomous drones and battle suits to support human soldiers on the front lines. As the preparations continued, a sense of purpose and unity spread among the people of Earth. Millions volunteered for military service or to help with the war effort in whatever way they could. Communities came together to support one another, sharing resources and offering comfort in the face of an uncertain future. Jae-sung watched in amazement as the world transformed before his eyes. He had always dreamed of humanity coming together to achieve great things, but he never imagined it would happen like this. As he worked long hours analyzing the Zorian message and helping to develop new defense technologies, he felt a sense of pride and determination growing within him. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, and that many lives would be lost before the war was over. But he also knew that humanity would not go down without a fight. They would stand together, united in their resolve to protect their home and their way of life. As the final preparations were made, and the world braced itself for the coming storm, Jae-sung looked up at the stars and whispered a silent prayer. "We're ready," he said softly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." And with that, humanity prepared to face its greatest challenge yet, a war that would determine the fate of their species and the future of their world. The day humanity had been dreading finally arrived. Zorian warships, sleek and menacing, appeared on the outskirts of the solar system. They moved with a speed and precision that struck fear into the hearts of even the bravest defenders. As the alien fleet closed in on Earth, they unleashed a devastating attack on the Mars colony. The Red Planet, once a symbol of humanity's ambition and progress, became a battlefield as Zorian ground forces swarmed the settlements and research stations. The human defenders fought bravely, but they were outmatched by the superior technology and firepower of the enemy. The skies above Mars lit up with the flash of energy weapons and the explosions of destroyed spacecraft. Back on Earth, people watched in horror as live feeds from the Mars colony showed the brutality of the Zorian assault. Families huddled together in fear, wondering if their loved ones on the Red Planet would survive the onslaught. In the command centers of Earth's military forces, leaders scrambled to mount a counterattack. Fighter squadrons were launched to engage the enemy in space, while ground troops prepared to repel any attempt at a planetary invasion. The space battles were fierce and bloody, with losses mounting on both sides. But for every Zorian ship destroyed, it seemed like two more took its place. The alien fleet was vast and relentless, driven by a single-minded determination to conquer and destroy. As the fighting raged on, it became clear that the Mars colony was lost. The last desperate transmissions from the surface spoke of overwhelming odds and dwindling supplies. Finally, after days of brutal combat, the Zorians claimed victory on the Red Planet. But even as they celebrated their triumph, the alien invaders knew that the real prize lay ahead. Earth, the birthplace of humanity, was their ultimate target, and they would stop at nothing to claim it as their own. On Earth, the news of the fall of Mars was a devastating blow. People wept openly in the streets, mourning the loss of so many brave souls. But amid the grief and despair, there was also a flicker of hope. For in the wreckage of the Mars colony, human forces had made a startling discovery. The Zorians, for all their advanced technology, were not invincible. They had weaknesses, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. It was a small victory in the face of overwhelming odds, but it was enough to rekindle the fire of determination in the hearts of humanity. They had lost a battle, but the war was far from over. As the Zorian fleet set its sights on Earth, the people of the planet steeled themselves for the fight to come. They knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, and that many more lives would be lost before the end. But they also knew that they had no choice but to stand and fight. For this was not just a battle for territory or resources. It was a battle for the very survival of their species. And so, as the enemy drew near and the skies grew dark with the shadow of their ships, Humanity prepared to face its greatest challenge yet. They would fight with every ounce of strength and courage they possessed, and they would not rest until the Zorian threat was vanquished once and for all. As the war raged on, humanity knew that they needed more than just military might to defeat the Zorians. They needed intelligence, a way to understand their enemies' motives and weaknesses. That's where Jin Suyan came in. Suyan was a master spy, trained in the art of infiltration and espionage. She had been recruited by Earth's intelligence agencies to undertake a dangerous mission, to sneak aboard a Zorian command ship and gather critical information about their plans and capabilities. It was a risky operation, but Suyan was determined to succeed. She underwent extensive training, learning the Zorian language and customs, and studying their technology and security protocols. Finally, after months of preparation, she was ready to embark on her mission. Using a stolen Zorian shuttle, Suyan managed to slip past the enemy's defenses and dock with one of their command ships. Once on board, she quickly blended in with the crew, using her disguise and language skills to avoid detection. For days, Suyan moved through the ship like a ghost, gathering intel and planting surveillance devices. She discovered that the Zorians were driven by a fanatical belief in their own superiority, and that they saw humanity as little more than insects to be crushed underfoot. But she also uncovered a weakness in their command structure. The Zorians were highly dependent on their central AI system, which controlled everything from their weapons to their life support. If that system could be disrupted or destroyed, it would deal a crippling blow to their entire war effort. Armed with this knowledge, Suyan prepared to make her escape. But just as she was about to leave, she was discovered by a Zorian security patrol. In a desperate fight, she managed to evade capture and steal a small fighter ship, blasting her way out of the command vessel and into the void of space. As she raced back to Earth, Suyan knew that the information she carried could change the course of the war. She had risked everything to get it, and now it was up to her to deliver it into the hands of those who could use it to strike back against the Zorians. When she finally arrived at Earth's orbital defenses, Suyan was greeted as a hero. Her intel was quickly analyzed and disseminated to military leaders around the world, who used it to plan a series of targeted strikes against key Zorian installations and command centers. The attacks were swift and devastating, catching the enemy off guard and disrupting their operations. For the first time since the war began, the Zorians were on the defensive, scrambling to adapt to humanity's new tactics. In the midst of the chaos, Jae Sung and his team of scientists worked tirelessly to develop new weapons and defenses based on the information Suyan had gathered. They knew that every breakthrough they made could mean the difference between victory and defeat. As the tide of the war began to turn, humanity dared to hope that they might actually have a chance at winning. But they also knew that the Zorians would not go down easily, and that the hardest battles were still to come. Through it all, the courage and sacrifice of heroes like Suyan and Min Seo would be remembered and celebrated. They had risked everything to give their people a fighting chance, and their legacy would endure long after the war was over. As the war raged on, humanity knew that they needed more than just military might to defeat the Zorians. They needed intelligence, a way to understand their enemies' motives and weaknesses. That's where Jin Suyan came in. Suyan was a master spy, trained in the art of infiltration and espionage. She had been recruited by Earth's intelligence agencies to undertake a dangerous mission, to sneak aboard a Zorian command ship and gather critical information about their plans and capabilities. It was a risky operation, but Suyan was determined to succeed. She underwent extensive training, learning the Zorian language and customs, and studying their technology and security protocols. Finally, after months of preparation, she was ready to embark on her mission. Using a stolen Zorian shuttle, Suyan managed to slip past the enemy's defenses and dock with one of their command ships. Once on board, she quickly blended in with the crew, using her disguise and language skills to avoid detection. For days, Suyan moved through the ship like a ghost, gathering intel and planting surveillance devices. She discovered that the Zorians were driven by a fanatical belief in their own superiority, and that they saw humanity as little more than insects to be crushed underfoot. But she also uncovered a weakness in their command structure. The Zorians were highly dependent on their central AI system, which controlled everything from their weapons to their life support. If that system could be disrupted or destroyed, it would deal a crippling blow to their entire war effort. Armed with this knowledge, Su Yan prepared to make her escape. But just as she was about to leave, she was discovered by a Zorian security patrol. In a desperate fight, she managed to evade capture and steal a small fighter ship, blasting her way out of the command vessel and into the void of space. As she raced back to Earth, Su Yan knew that the information she carried could change the course of the war. She had risked everything to get it, and now it was up to her to deliver it into the hands of those who could use it to strike back against the Zorians. When she finally arrived at Earth's orbital defenses, Su Yan was greeted as a hero. Her intel was quickly analyzed and disseminated to military leaders around the world, who used it to plan a series of targeted strikes against key Zorian installations and command centers. The attacks were swift and devastating, catching the enemy off guard and disrupting their operations. For the first time since the war began, the Zorians were on the defensive, scrambling to adapt to humanity's new tactics. In the midst of the chaos, Jae Sung and his team of scientists worked tirelessly to develop new weapons and defenses based on the information Su Yan had gathered. They knew that every breakthrough they made could mean the difference between victory and defeat. As the tide of the war began to turn, humanity dared to hope that they might actually have a chance at winning. But they also knew that the Zorians would not go down easily, and that the hardest battles were still to come. Through it all, the courage and sacrifice of heroes like Su Yan and Min Seo would be remembered and celebrated. They had risked everything to give their people a fighting chance, and their legacy would endure long after the war was over. With the information gathered by Su Yan and the new weapons developed by Jae Sung and his team, humanity was finally ready to make their final stand against the Zorians. They knew that this was their last chance to turn the tide of the war, and they were determined to make it count. The human fleet gathered in Earth's orbit, a vast armada of ships and fighters from every nation on the planet. They were joined by their allies from other worlds, species who had also suffered under the Zorian threat and were eager to join the fight. Leading the charge was Admiral Min Seo, his flagship at the head of the formation. He knew that this battle would be the toughest yet, but he also knew that his people were ready for it. They had trained and prepared for this moment, and they would not back down. As the fleet set out for Zorian space, they were met by wave after wave of enemy ships. The Zorians threw everything they had at the human forces, desperate to stop their advance. The battles were fierce and bloody, with losses mounting on both sides. But the humans had a secret weapon, a new type of nanotech bomb that could penetrate the Zorian shields and disable their ships from within. It was a risky gambit, but one that could turn the tide of the war if it worked. As the fleets clashed in the skies above Zoria Prime, the human forces launched their nanotech weapons. The bombs streaked through space, dodging enemy fire and homing in on their targets. When they struck, the results were devastating. Zorian ships began to falter and fail, their systems overloaded by the nanotech swarms. Some exploded in massive fireballs, while others simply drifted off course, their crews unable to regain control. The human fleet pressed their advantage, blasting through the enemy lines and heading straight for the heart of the Zorian Empire. On the surface of Zoria Prime, the human ground forces were also making their move. They stormed the capital city, fighting their way through the streets and buildings, determined to capture the Zorian leaders and force their surrender. It was a brutal, bloody battle, with heavy casualties on both sides. But in the end, the human forces prevailed. They captured the Zorian Emperor and his top generals, along with the central AI system that controlled their entire war machine. With their leadership in chains and their fleet in ruins, the Zorians had no choice but to surrender. The war was over, and humanity had emerged victorious. But the cost had been high, and the scars would take years to heal. As the human forces celebrated their triumph, Admiral Min Seo stood on the bridge of his flagship, gazing out at the stars. He thought of all those who had fought and died to make this victory possible, and he knew that their sacrifice would never be forgotten. Beside him, Jae Sung and Su Yan watched in silence, their hearts heavy with the weight of all they had seen and done. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they also knew that humanity had proven itself capable of overcoming even the greatest of challenges. Together, they would rebuild their world and their lives, stronger and more united than ever before. And they would always remember the lesson they had learned, that when faced with an existential threat, humanity would never back down, never surrender, and never stop fighting for their right to exist. As the Zorian homeworld burned, the once proud Emperor Zorgkill knew that he had no choice but to surrender. The human forces had proven too strong, too resilient, and too determined to be defeated. With a heavy heart, he transmitted a message to Admiral Min Seo, offering his unconditional surrender. On the bridge of his flagship, Min Seo received the message with a mix of relief and sadness. He had lost so many good men and women in this war, friends and comrades who had fought bravely to the very end. But he also knew that their sacrifice had not been in vain. As the news of the Zorian surrender spread throughout the fleet, cheers erupted from every ship and station. The long nightmare was finally over, and humanity had emerged victorious. But even as they celebrated, the soldiers and sailors of the Earth Alliance knew that the cost of victory had been high. On the surface of Zoria Prime, Jae Sung stood amidst the ruins of the capital city, his heart heavy with the weight of all that had been lost. He thought of his colleagues and friends, the brave men and women who had given their lives to make this victory possible. But he also thought of how far humanity had come, how much they had endured and overcome. Just a few short years ago, they had been a scattered and divided species, barely aware of the dangers that lurked in the stars. Now, they were a united force, a power to be reckoned with on the galactic stage. As he watched the Zorian prisoners being led away in chains, Jae Sung knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Earth had suffered greatly in the war, and it would take years, perhaps decades, to rebuild what had been lost. But he also knew that humanity had learned a valuable lesson, one that they would never forget. They had learned that they were stronger together than they ever could be apart, and that when faced with an existential threat, they would always rise to the challenge. In the days and weeks that followed, the leaders of the Earth Alliance worked tirelessly to secure the peace and begin the process of rebuilding. They reached out to their allies across the galaxy, forging new bonds of friendship and cooperation. And they made a solemn vow, one that would be passed down from generation to generation. Never again would humanity be caught unprepared. Never again would they allow themselves to be divided and conquered by an alien threat. As he stood on the observation deck of his ship, watching the stars drift by, Admiral Min Seo reflected on all that had happened. He thought of the brave men and women who had fought and died under his command, and he silently thanked them for their sacrifice. He knew that the universe was still a dangerous place, filled with untold wonders and untold threats. But he also knew that humanity was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had proven themselves in the crucible of war, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. And so, as the ships of the Earth Alliance set out into the infinite reaches of space, they carried with them a message of hope and determination. They were the guardians of humanity, the protectors of all that was good and right in the universe. And they would never, ever back down from a fight. 10 years had passed since the end of the Zorian War, and the galaxy had changed in ways that few could have imagined. The once scattered nations of Earth had united under a single banner, forming the Terran Alliance, a powerful federation dedicated to exploration, discovery, and the defense of all sentient life. At the head of this new order was Eunji, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. Now serving as the elder counselor of the Alliance, she worked tirelessly to promote peace and cooperation among the stars. Under her leadership, humanity had reached out to other spacefaring races, forging new alliances and partnerships. Together, they had explored strange new worlds, made groundbreaking scientific discoveries, and pushed the boundaries of what was possible. But even as the Alliance grew and prospered, Yunji knew that they could never let their guard down. The universe was still a dangerous place, and there were always new threats lurking in the shadows. That was why she had worked so hard to build up the Alliance's military might, investing in cutting-edge technologies and training programs. The brave men and women who served in the Alliance Defense Force were the best of the best, ready to lay down their lives to protect the innocent. Among them were the veterans of the Zorian War, heroes like Admiral Min Seo and Jin Su-yun. They had seen the horrors of war firsthand, and they knew better than anyone the price of peace. But even as they stood ready to defend the Alliance against any threat, they also knew that true strength came from within. It came from the bonds of friendship and unity that held the Alliance together, and from the shared values that guided their every action. As Yunji looked out over the gleaming cities of Earth, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. They had come so far since those dark days of the war, and they had built something truly remarkable. But she also knew that their work was far from finished. There were still so many challenges ahead, so many worlds to explore and mysteries to unravel. And as long as the Alliance stood together, united in their determination to build a better future, she knew that they would be ready to face whatever lay ahead. For Jae-sung, the end of the war had brought a new sense of purpose and direction. He had seen firsthand the incredible potential of science and technology, and he knew that he wanted to dedicate his life to pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He had joined the Alliance Science Council, working with some of the greatest minds in the galaxy to unlock the secrets of the universe. And though the work was hard, and the challenges were great, he knew that every discovery they made brought them one step closer to a brighter future. As he looked up at the stars, Jae-sung couldn't help but think of all those who had sacrificed so much to make this moment possible. The brave soldiers who had fought and died to defend their homeworld, the brilliant scientists who had worked tirelessly to build the weapons and technologies that had turned the tide of the war. They were the true heroes, the ones who had given everything to ensure that humanity would have a future. And as long as their memory lived on, as long as their spirit continued to guide the Alliance forward, Jae-sung knew that they would never be forgotten. And so, as the Terran Alliance set out to explore the infinite wonders of the universe, they did so with a sense of purpose and unity that had never been seen before. They were no longer just a collection of nations and races, but a single, united force, dedicated to building a better tomorrow for all. The road ahead would not be easy, and there would be many challenges and obstacles to overcome. But as long as they stood together, as long as they held fast to the values and ideals that had brought them this far, there was nothing they could not achieve. And as the stars beckoned them onward, the people of the Alliance knew that they were ready to meet whatever lay ahead. For they were the guardians of the galaxy, the protectors of all that was good and right in the universe, and they would never, ever back down from the fight for a better tomorrow.